Breaking news from a wonky world of cockwombles, because, quite honestly, there's so much refused to acknowledge what's happening here in the UK and what's being done to you. I would say this, if you carry on like this with your head in the sand, it's always going to be so much easier, isn't it, for the government to take you right up the... Angela Rayner, her of the ginger growler, turned up at a function with King Charles, dressed as an actual clown, with actual Ronald McDonald shoes on. I don't know what it is with these Labour women, like the Democrats. They have to make themselves as ugly as possible, as if to excuse the fact that no man would ever want to go anywhere near them.
A storm has erupted in Westminster, shaking the foundations of Keir Starmer's government. Today, history has been made as Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, has resigned in a stunning turn of events that no one saw coming. Political insiders are calling it a seismic blow, leaving questions about the future of Starmer's leadership, the integrity of his top team and the direction of the Labour government hanging in the balance. The events that unfolded were fast, dramatic and utterly unpredictable, turning what began as a quiet Friday morning in Downing Street into a political maelstrom that has left the nation stunned. Friday began like any other in the corridors of power, with ministers attending briefings, officials managing the daily grind and the press corps waiting for any hint of news that could shake Westminster. Yet by midday, the calm was shattered. Sky News has confirmed that Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, has tendered her resignation, an outcome that neither she nor Keir Starmer wanted but could no longer avoid. The catalyst for this unprecedented resignation was an official finding by the Prime Minister's ethics advisor, Laurie Magnus, who determined that Rayner had breached the ministerial code. In a stark letter to the Prime Minister, Magnus concluded that Rayner could not be regarded as having upheld the highest possible standards of proper conduct, leaving her position untenable. The details of the scandal centre on a high-profile property purchase that, though seemingly minor at first glance, had far-reaching consequences. Rayner had purchased a seaside flat but incorrectly paid a lower rate of stamp duty. This mistake left her owing an additional £40,000 to the tax authorities, a misstep she publicly acknowledged earlier in the week during an interview with Sky News. She admitted, "Well, I made a mistake based upon the advice that I relied upon, that I received at the time, and a leading expert has now said that advice was wrong. People make mistakes, but I conducted myself in trying to do the right thing, and I hope that people can see that." Her words, while sincere, could not shield her from the political fallout. Critics were quick to call for accountability, arguing that lawmakers must not only legislate but also adhere to the laws they expect others to follow. The pressure on Rayner escalated rapidly, with voices from both inside and outside the party demanding decisive action. Some said it's critical that those in power demonstrate personal integrity. If the Deputy Prime Minister cannot keep her own financial affairs in order, how can she be trusted to implement policies for millions of citizens? By the time she submitted her resignation, it was clear that the Deputy Prime Minister's position had become politically impossible to defend. Starmer, in response, accepted her resignation with a handwritten note highlighting the personal toll this crisis had taken. In his letter, he acknowledged Rayner as a true friend and praised her dedication, writing, "Although I believe you have reached the right decision, you have given your all to making the Labour government a success." Yet behind the civility of that letter lay a government teetering on the edge of chaos, with Starmer facing the immediate challenge of managing the fallout and protecting the stability of his cabinet. The resignation triggered a rapid reshuffle, forcing Starmer to make swift decisions about who would fill the vacancies left by Rayner's departure. With David Lammy moving from the Foreign Office to become the new Deputy Prime Minister, Shabana Mahmood promoted to Home Secretary, and Yvette Cooper taking the reins at the Foreign Office, Starmer signalled that he intended to transform this crisis into an opportunity for a bold reset. However, the stakes were high. Every choice, every promotion and every announcement would be scrutinised under the unforgiving lens of public and political opinion. Angela Rayner's resignation was not merely a personnel change, it was a flashpoint, a moment that revealed both the fragility of the government and the complex web of expectations placed on those in power. While Rayner moves to the backbenches, her influence remains undeniable, and the Labour Party must now navigate an uncertain landscape, balancing the need for accountability with the imperative of presenting a united front. The public, already wary from months of political controversies, watches closely, aware that today's decisions could shape the future of the government and the party for years to come. This was not a routine resignation. It was a shockwave, a test of Starmer's leadership, and a moment that has already set the political stage for the coming months. As the dust begins to settle, one thing is clear: the Labour government has entered a new era, one defined by high stakes, intense scrutiny, and a relentless drive to prove that it can survive even the most unexpected crises. Shockwaves from Angela Rayner's resignation reverberated far beyond the walls of Downing Street, instantly dominating political commentary across the country. For months, Keir Starmer had faced criticism for his cautious approach, often described by pundits as overly careful, hesitant, or even timid. Now he was confronted with the stark reality that caution could no longer protect his government from public scrutiny and political upheaval. The departure of his deputy prime minister, a figure who had long been seen as a cornerstone of his leadership team, presented both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge was clear. With Rayner gone, Starmer's government risked appearing unstable, fractured and reactive, leaving his administration vulnerable to opposition attacks and rising public dissatisfaction. The opportunity, however, was just as significant. By reshuffling his cabinet, Starmer had the chance to demonstrate decisive leadership, send a message of accountability, and signal that he would not allow errors or lapses in judgment to undermine the integrity of his government. The new appointments reflected both political pragmatism and strategic calculation. David Lammy, stepping into the Deputy Prime Minister role from the Foreign Office, was tasked not only with stabilising the internal machinery of government, but also with projecting competence and reliability to a wary public. Shabana Mahmood's promotion to Home Secretary placed her at the centre of one of the government's most pressing challenges: the escalating small boats crisis in the English Channel, a situation that had already attracted intense media attention and criticism from both domestic and international observers. Yvette Cooper's move to the Foreign Office brought diplomatic experience and a steady hand to a role that had become increasingly crucial in the face of global uncertainty, trade negotiations, and ongoing international scrutiny of Britain's foreign policy. Behind the scenes, the mood in Westminster was tense. Ministers and advisers worked frantically to adjust to the new configuration of the cabinet, while political analysts debated the implications of Rayner's departure. Questions abounded. Could Starmer maintain unity within the party? Would the reshuffle inspire confidence among voters, or would it be seen as a desperate attempt to contain damage? How would Rayner, now relegated to the backbenches, influence parliamentary debates and party dynamics from a position outside the executive team? Meanwhile, the public followed every development with keen interest, aware that the scandal that prompted Rayner's resignation, mismanagement of a personal property tax, was emblematic of a broader expectation of transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct from those in power. The narrative was stark. Lawmakers must exemplify the standards they set for others, and failure to do so can result in swift and unforgiving consequences. This tension was amplified by media coverage that highlighted both the human dimension of Rayner's resignation and the strategic manoeuvring of Starmer's response. Her acknowledgement of personal responsibility, her public regret, and her departure from the government combined to create a dramatic tableau, one that reinforced the high stakes of political life and the relentless scrutiny leaders face. At the same time, Starmer's actions were interpreted as a calculated gamble. By moving swiftly to fill key positions, he attempted to project an image of a government that was adaptive, decisive, and prepared to confront challenges head-on. Yet the reshuffle also carried risk. Each new appointment would be dissected, analysed and critiqued, leaving little room for error and ensuring that any misstep could further erode public confidence. For the Labour Party, the implications were profound. The departure of Rayner, a prominent figure within the party and a symbolic representative of its working class roots, created a void that could not easily be filled. Her influence, charisma, and political experience meant that even outside the executive, she would remain a formidable voice capable of shaping policy debates, challenging leadership decisions, and influencing the mood of the parliamentary party. As the day unfolded, the interplay of personal accountability, political strategy, and public perception became starkly visible. Rayner's resignation was not just a single event, it was a catalyst that exposed vulnerabilities within the government, tested the resolve of its leadership, and forced a reckoning with the expectations of voters, media, and political insiders alike. Starmer's response, measured yet decisive, highlighted the delicate balance between ethical obligation and political pragmatism. The Labour government, facing a critical juncture, now had to navigate the fallout while projecting competence, unity, and the capacity to govern effectively. In these high-stakes moments, every statement, every appointment, and every decision carried weight, shaping both the immediate political landscape and the long-term trajectory of the party in power. Westminster watched closely, knowing that the next moves could define not only Starmer's leadership, but also the future of British politics in a period marked by uncertainty, scrutiny, and rapid change. As the news of Angela Rayner's resignation spread, the atmosphere in Westminster turned electric, charged with speculation, analysis, and tension. For Keir Starmer, the implications were immediate and profound. Rayner had been more than a deputy. She had been a symbol of Labour's ambitions and a bridge to key voter bases, particularly those who valued authenticity, grassroots engagement, and connection to everyday struggles. Her departure created not just a vacuum in leadership, but also a symbolic rupture in the narrative Starmer had carefully cultivated. Within hours, political commentators dissected every aspect of the resignation: the timing, the language of her public statements, the tone of Starmer's handwritten note, and the speed with which the reshuffle unfolded. The seaside flat scandal, seemingly a technical financial misstep, had morphed into a moment of ethical reckoning, one that highlighted the fragile intersection of personal conduct and political responsibility. Across the media landscape, voices debated whether Rayner had been treated fairly or whether she had been made a scapegoat for broader systemic issues within the government. Critics emphasised the principle of accountability, noting that leaders must be held to standards higher than those expected of ordinary citizens. Supporters, however, highlighted the context of her mistake, pointing to the reliance on specialist advice and the fact that she had acted in good faith, acknowledging her error openly. The tension between these perspectives created a charged environment, one where public opinions, party loyalty, and media framing intersected with extraordinary intensity. Meanwhile, inside the government, the reshuffle prompted both relief and anxiety. Ministers and senior advisors understood that rapid adaptation was necessary to maintain the functionality of the cabinet, yet the speed of change introduced new uncertainties. David Lammy, stepping into the role of Deputy Prime Minister, faced immediate pressure to demonstrate leadership, assert authority, and stabilise a government navigating turbulent waters. His transition from the Foreign Office required swift familiarisation with domestic priorities, parliamentary dynamics, and crisis management responsibilities. Shabana Mahmood, newly appointed Home Secretary, encountered a similar challenge. Tasked with addressing the escalating small boats crisis, she was thrust into a role that demanded not only administrative competence, but also to respond decisively under intense public and media scrutiny. Yvette Cooper's move to the Foreign Office added further complexity, requiring her to navigate global diplomatic challenges at a time when international attention was sharply focused on Britain's political stability. The ripple effects of Rayner's resignation extended far beyond cabinet reshuffles. Parliamentary debates, party strategy sessions, and internal communications all reflected the heightened stakes. Labour MPs were forced to reassess their positions, align their messaging, and anticipate the reactions of constituents increasingly attuned to the ethical standards and competence of their elected officials. Simultaneously, opposition parties seized on the moment, framing Rayner's resignation as evidence of mismanagement, weak oversight, and leadership instability within Labour. The narrative was compelling. A high-profile resignation exposed cracks in governance, raised questions about accountability, and presented an opportunity for political adversaries to assert influence. Public perception, always a critical factor, became the central battlefield. Citizens absorbed each announcement, scrutinised each interview, and debated the implications across social media platforms and traditional news outlets. The delicate balance between transparency and strategic messaging became clear. How the government communicated its response could either reassure the public and restore confidence or further erode trust and invite criticism. For Starmer, the stakes were immense. His leadership was not only being tested in real time, but also evaluated against the backdrop of Labour's broader objectives, electoral considerations, and the party's long-term vision. Rayner's influence, even as she stepped away from government, remained a potent force. Her ability to shape discourse from the backbenches meant that Starmer could not afford to treat her departure as merely administrative. It was a political and symbolic pivot point, one that would continue to reverberate through parliamentary debates and party strategy for months to come. The resignation underscored a timeless truth of politics. One misstep, one ethical lapse, or one poorly managed situation can trigger consequences that ripple far beyond the initial incident. It illustrated the fragility of political capital, the scrutiny of public office, and the high stakes of leadership in a democracy where accountability is both expected and demanded. As Westminster adjusted to the new reality, the Labour Party faced a complex challenge: maintaining cohesion, projecting competence, and navigating the intersection of ethical standards, public expectation, and political strategy. Angela Rayner's resignation was not simply a moment of individual accountability. It was a crucible in which the future of Starmer's government, the credibility of his leadership, and the cohesion of his top team would be tested. In this high-stakes environment, every decision, every statement, and every appointment carried the weight of consequence. The eyes of the nation, the scrutiny of the media, and the judgment of history converged on Westminster, creating a tension that was palpable, immediate, and inescapable.